All right, so this one's going to be pretty quick, going over some questions I've had regarding Ryan Truex and Jeffrey Earnhardt going to Sam Hunt Racing for a couple races next year. It also gives us a good example to see how you might want to use lap by lap data during the season, or how you can use it to look at previous drivers and previous races, or just things like that. I figure this would be a good example. So real quick before we get into that, so for those that may or may not know, Sam Hunt, or Jeffrey Earnhardt's going to be racing for Sam Hunt Racing for an undisclosed amount of races. I'm going to guess 4, because they would be announcing a lot more than that. Same thing with Ryan Truex. Those guys will be in the 26 car next year. Obviously, we're just going to see kind of a rotating door of drivers, just like we did last year. But I wanted to go over and talk about this car and where I think this car truly is in terms of how fast it is, in terms of the capability that it has with a competent driver behind it, and yada, yada, yada. So really, we're just going to pinpoint the finishes and kind of talk over the drivers that were in it last year. We're going to look at John Nemechek's races in these. Those are the ones we're going to be looking at the lap-by-lap data in, and really just giving my example here. And so, obviously, starting off the year, Godovic finished 8th at Daytona, 18th with Chris Wright at the Daytona Road Course, and really, the races that Chris Wright ran last year, regardless of what car it was in, he ran into a ton of bad luck, like nearly in every single road course. And even in the other race that he was in, he would put himself in positions that were like looking really good, and he would just get caught up in late race accidents. Like, sure, it has to be him putting himself in those situations, but still, that's just bad luck on Chris Wright in a multitude of races last year. Anyway, we get to Santino. Obviously a guy who comes from IndyCar, not a ton of stock car experience, and certainly not a ton of experience on ovals. That's why he's running in this car, to get that type of experience in it. And seeing what a guy with no experience is able to do, obviously Homestead, difficult track, no practice. I'm not surprised with the 30th place finish. I believe he got in the wall, went a lap down, just due to, getting in the wall, getting in speed. And obviously this race got real crazy at the end, because we had David Starr run into, or rather, Gregson ran to the back of David Starr. But anyway, Santino finished 13th at Las Vegas, 15th at Phoenix, 15th at Atlanta, 17th at Martinsville for Godovic, 15th at Talladega for Colin Garrett. I forgot that was Talladega. Anyway, Godovic got into an accident early in the race at Darlington. I believe it was like lap 14, something out of turn 3, or in turn 3. Went multiple laps down, having to repair damage. But when we look at how Santino is running this car, I mean, this car with Santino in it is a fringe top 10 car. The reason I bring that up is because I truly believe that the equipment that they're running here, I would argue that it's just under what a Joe Gibbs car is, because they're running Joe Gibbs racing engines, or TRD motors, same thing really. The top of the line of Toyota Racing Development is Joe Gibbs. That's where Sam Hunt is buying the engines from. He bought them from there last year. He's buying them from there again this year. So really, this is a Toyota backed, not even Toyota backed, but the engines that they're running is coming straight from Toyota. It's not some crappy Chevrolet motor that JD Motorsports put together, or some just a hunk of junk car. I mean, he's buying brand new equipment. The reason I bring this up is this is where I believe that this car should be running with a driver that is less than capable, a driver that you wouldn't expect to be performing well. It's going to be a 15th. It's going to be a 17th. It's going to be a 14th place car week in and week out. When we get to Godovic, like I said, he got in an early accident at Darlington. And due to that accident, John Nemechek had to start in the back of the field at Dover because of the metric qualifying system that they were running, because they obviously weren't running time qualifying last year. And so anyway, John Nemechek he starts from the back of the pack at Dover, and you've heard me talk about you've heard me talk a lot about Charlotte Motor Speedway, and why I think that is a great baseline and the perfect type of track to understand where a car and where a team is program-wise for the intermediate tracks, the 1.5 miles, is because despite the fact that Charlotte is pretty much a single groove racetrack, it's a really tight racetrack to begin with, but really there's only one groove. The reason that's important is because the aero push at Charlotte is so much bigger than the other tracks that we have on this on the circuit of any of the series. So when you think of places like Dover, when you think of places like Charlotte, even Darlington to an extent, that aero push is going to be huge. Anyway, Charlotte, if you're able to cut through the field and certainly cut through lap cars and pull away from people during the Coca-Cola 600, during the time Xfinity races there, during the time the Truck Series race there, Charlotte is just a great baseline, because if you're able to pass in that dirty air, you're going to be good everywhere else. I'm leaning more towards believing that Dover is in a similar category, and obviously it is, but entering this year, I'm almost wanting to lean more off of how they run at Dover to predict on how they are going to run at Charlotte. Anyway, the point is, it remains the same with dirty air. At Dover, yeah, sure, you can argue that the corners are super wide, but really, yet again, Dover is a one-groove racetrack, and you are going to get tight out of turn 2 and turn 4, regardless of any dirty air. The dirty air just makes it worse, but that's an extremely tight racetrack out of the corners, and so if you're able to cut through the field at Dover, if you're able to perform well at Dover, certainly start in the back of the pack with this type of car that the 26 has, that John Hunter Nemechek had, is really, really impressive. And so entering this week, or entering last year at Dover, I would see how Santino would run it. I would see how Godovic would run. I would see how Chris Wright would run, and see that this car with these drivers who aren't necessarily that good, I mean, they're good. Look, obviously most people in NASCAR are good, but when we're really, counting Rice and measuring Rice, 15th, 17th, these guys are not that good. So when you get a good driver in there, John Hunter Nemechek, why is he running this car? He's not going to run some piece of shit motor. He's not going to run some piece of shit car. And so when he's running Dover, I wanted to be extremely high on him, and I wanted to see how he would run in this race. I was very curious to see what an actual good driver, could do in this machine. Now, I'm sure you're looking at the results and you see that, John Hunter Nemechek finished 32nd, didn't get any laps led. What's going on? Why are we focusing on this so much, Brandon? Well, let's focus on how fast John Hunter Nemechek cut through this field in this car at Dover. And so let's go ahead and find Dover here, which you can get by supporting us, BrandonCruzDFS Patreon. You the link above. Link is in the description below if you want access to this. It's all included this year. But anyway, let's take a gander at John Hunter Nemechek in this race. And so as I noted, he started basically towards the end of the pack because he was filling in after Godovic wrecked early at Dover, and so he starts 30th. He's up to 16th by lap 21 on an extremely tight racetrack. Like, not only is this a tight racetrack, not only do you deal with, being tight in traffic, he's dealing with actually making moves around cars that are, obviously, yes, they are slower, but when you're having to make moves and go specifically out of the groove of where he was making moves, like, there's no footage of him because nobody's focusing, the TV is not focusing on John Hunter Nemechek running in 30th at the start of the race. They're not focusing on him running in 17th on lap 9. They're focused on the leader. But how is he making these passes? If there's so many slow cars that are most likely in the preferred lanes, either strictly on the bottom or running in the middle of the track, John Hunter Nemechek is having to run up and down this track. He's using the entire track, man. They paid his entry fee, and he's using the entire track, and so that's impressive to see that a car is able to basically cut through the field that quickly. I know it's the Xfinity Series, I know it's at Dover, but this is a really good sign, and so by default, John Hunter Nemechek is in 15th out of the caution on lap 26, where this car is running with less than ideal drivers in this car previously. And so we get to, another caution, most likely competition caution on lap 33. I don't remember exactly. Anyway, he comes out of that restart, starts 13th, drives up to 10th. And at this point, he's racing with guys that are actually, competent. Who is he racing around? He's racing around Zane Smith. He's racing around, and you can, whenever you're viewing it, you can click this and sort by whatever lap it is. I'm just not going to do it here, so I don't have to Control Z or forget or anything. But who is John Hunter Nemechek racing against at this point? So he's racing around people like Zane Smith. He's racing around cars that are actually, competitive. Obviously, right behind him, we have Jeremy Clements, Burton, Daniel Hemrick, racing around Ryan Sieg, Michael Annett. These guys right on the fringe of the top 10. And hell, you can even argue that Ty Gibbs is running 8th right now. Where is John Hunter Nemechek running? Oh, he's in 10th. John Hunter Nemechek is right behind Ty Gibbs in a car that is very similar in terms of speed. I believe this is the end of the first stage. So we come out of that, we get another yellow right off the bat, which yet again, we just wreck a ton in Xfinity. These guys are pretty talentless. But anyway, so they go into pit road right off the bat. He drives past those guys again. He's back in 10th. Caution comes out. We get another caution. Once we actually get, a bit of a run to where, and the guys that are being taken out here, sure, you could argue that Brandon Jones got taken out. Zane Smith got taken out. So that's 2 guys that are racing around John Hunter Nemechek are people that should have finished in front of him, but even still, like John Hunter Nemechek piling this thing to 8th and driving through this field this well is impressive. Obviously, we go through the second stage, and once we get into a long run, we can see that, sure, he's running 9th. He's not able to really do much, but you got to remember, at this point, he's racing against guys that are actually racing well. They really haven't been able to make any changes on this car because he's just been having to drive through the field. Sure, you can argue that, well, Brandon, if he's going faster, if he's actually cutting through the field, he should be performing better. But my point is, when we're looking at how this car is performing with some guy that actually knows what he's doing, we're moving from a 15th place car to a car that by default is running 8th and 9th, which is what I believe that this car is capable of week in and week out. It just depends on if John Hunter Nemechek or whatever good drivers in it can elevate it past that. That's what good drivers do. Anyway, we get here, 138, 139. We end up having a broken track bar mount on the rear end of this car. They go in the garage, obviously go back 18 laps, and they finish 18 laps off the pace. But this was a extremely impressive display of speed from this car that we really hadn't seen last year at this point in the season. And so I wanted to make a note of that when we kept moving on. So when we get to Charlotte, we get a very similar situation to where Grant Enfinger is hopping in this car last minute for Godovic. I forgot if Godovic was sick, if he had COVID, whatever the case was. Godovic wasn't able to race. Grant Enfinger, obviously, it was Charlotte, so they still had everybody around from the Truck Series race. And obviously, most drivers live around the Charlotte area, or at least within 2.5 hours of this track. And so the morning of, they ask Enfinger, hey, can you hop in here? Can you drive it for us? And sure, Enfinger's like, sure. And so, yet again, what is Enfinger having to do that we saw John Hunter Nemechek do? Basically having to cut through the field. When we get to Charlotte, like I just said, a very tight racetrack, not a lot of rooms to make moves on. Early in this race, Grant Enfinger is making a move on, I think, the 13. I forgot if it was Chad Finchip or somebody. Anyway, Enfinger basically makes it 3 wide, cutting through the middle, and just gets clipped on the right rear of his car into the wall, DNFs right off the bat. But Enfinger was trying to make moves. So, sure, we can't really take much data away from that, but, I'm just basically making this argument. I just talked about John Hunter Nemechek. I'm talking about why Enfinger finished 36th there. I think he most likely would have brought this car back up to, by default, 15th. And I'll expand on that more when we talk about Earnhardt and Truex shortly here. And so Chris Wright, obviously bad luck at Mid-Ohio, got involved in a wreck late in that incident. And it was actually I think that was the caution that caused Brett Moffitt to have an ignition issue. Anyway, so we get Will Rogers at Nashville, 14th. Santino Ferrucci, Pocono, 15th. All right, we're just seeing consistent finishes from guys that, regardless of the driver, this car is 14th, 16th, 14th, 15th. I think I said 14 twice there, but that's where this car is running. Godovic hops back in at Loudon, 16th. I mean, man, Chris Wright had so many disappointing races in this car. Michigan, Colin Garrett, 20. Unfortunate. Got wrecked at Daytona, 17th at Darlington, which is pretty good because, yet again, we did not have practice. They did not run that many laps at Darlington, so at least seen by default, 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th, or right around there is where that car should be. We get back to Richmond. And, sorry, I was trying to avoid the cough, and I'm pretty sure it got in there. Anyway, so we get to Richmond, and yet again, I want to talk about how Nemechek was able to cut through this field at Richmond, and we want to talk about how difficult it is to pass at Dover and Charlotte. I mean, intermediate tracks that are small racing surfaces or not very wide racing surfaces are difficult to pass in. Another place that is difficult to pass in is a flat short track, to where if you're making moves specifically off of restarts or early in runs, and you're having to make moves, unless you're able to get to the bottom and basically move people out of the way, you're making moves on the outside. You're making moves on the entry of the corners in places that aren't the preferred lane. And so when we see Nemechek here, let's see how quickly he cuts through the field again. And so let's go right ahead. Yet again, starting the back of the field, cutting through the field. I mean, in 5 laps, past 7 guys. Okay, that's kind of a given. That's expected. 20 laps in the race, right at 14th, right at where this car should be placed on. once we actually get through that, you can see that he just continuously cuts through this field. Obviously, we get the competition yellow, or some yellow that happens here. Anyway, we see that he's just able to basically, I'm pretty sure people pitted here. That's why he was able to pass up to 8th and 9th. Anyway, a little bit of a loss of speed on the short run into stage 1. They come out of the, and see, this is an indication of where they're kind of struggling here. So it seems to me that John Nemechek was struggling on the short run speeds because he comes out of the caution in 6th. He's in 5th, drives with the 4th. Most likely guys on fresher tires or just a short run speed that this car doesn't have right here drops him back to 8th. But right here, running in 8th. I mean, this is where this car should be right here. Got past in the long run. They have a yellow, lap 148, comes out of that. In 9th, I'm sure they make some adjustments, and you can see that due to this long run, seeing that Nemechek was able to fall, or seeing that he went from 4th, fell back to 8th, understanding what this car needs, coming out of these cautions back to back, they're able to make adjustments. And so he goes into pit road here, comes out, makes adjustments, able to adjust what this car needed, still running 4th, just needs that little extra bump to get up there. But this car that we've seen Joe Schmoes run 14th and 15th, we get a real car in here making real changes. He's in 4th, able to make adjustments, finishes 3rd, even with all the yellows at the end. This is what you wanted to see. And so a guy that actually knows how to drive can carry this car up to a top 6 car, a top 5 car. Now, when we're going back and we're talking about Jeffrey Earnhardt and where we think he's going to finish, I think him and Truex, if they're not hitting the expectation of 17th, 15th, 14th, this is where this car should run with bad drivers. I don't necessarily believe that Jeffrey Earnhardt is the pinnacle of the Earnhardt family. I don't believe that he still has that not even still had, he never did really, but he does not have that Earnhardt blood that'll carry him to a top 5 car. I say that, and we're going to look at his previous finishes, and we're going to see when he was running Joe Gibbs equipment, which I just said, I believe the Sam Hunt car is slightly under what a Joe Gibbs car should do. And when we think of Joe Gibbs, sure, you might think of Hemrick. Sure, you might think of Harrison Burton last year. But you also got to remember that Brandon Jones is in a Joe Gibbs car. Do we see Brandon Jones, just swinging for the fences, getting a ton of top 4 finishes? Not really. We're seeing him run around 7th, 6th, and 8th. And so it's really the same story when we look back at the 1 year where Jeffrey ran cars that are actually competitive. We can see where he was running, and we'll kind of dissect through these races as well real quick. And so when we get here, Daytona, can't count that away. When we go to Atlanta, okay, Jeffrey, you finished 6th at Atlanta, and I believe this is the year of the big 3, which was Custer, Briscoe, and Bell, but we'll take a gander who he was racing around. I believe this is a pretty weak field this year, or these years. So you obviously get Bell, Custer, Allgaier, Jones, Reddick, Jeffrey, Ryan Preece. Pretty weak field. Haley did not have the skill that he had at this point. Gregson was pretty new on the scene, at least in this series. Cindric was just coming off of the really unlucky year that he had in the 60 car in 2018, or just the bad luck that was surrounding him. But when you look around here, I mean, this is a weak field. Sure, Briscoe finished 15th, but once we get past here, there's really no cars that are competitive at all. And so by default, at this point, I think Jeffrey Earnhardt should have finished 6th. I think that's where that car was. Was Jeffrey able to elevate that car past where it should finish by default? No, he was not. When we move and look at his other races at Fort Worth, same story, really. Obviously started 14th, didn't qualify that well. Finished 8th. Who was in this race? Where was everybody at? You had Kyle Busch in this race, so obviously that'll push where everybody finishes down, but you still have 2 of the big 3 right here. Maybe Cole Custer may have gotten involved in a wreck here. Yeah, Cole Custer got wrecked. And so even in a situation where two of the big 3, not even 2 of the big 3, but you had one of the big 3, Cole Custer, get involved in a wreck here. You had Brandon Jones get involved in a wreck here. You also had Brad Keselowski. So that's 3 cars that are top 3 finishers, really, at this point in time in this series. And where does Earnhardt finish at this point? He finishes 8th with 3 cars that should have been ahead of him. You can even push that down and argue that he should have finished 11th or 12th. When we go to, I believe it's the race at Charlotte, I'm pretty sure it's his 3rd place finish, if I remember correctly, that this was a wreckfest that took out a ton of cars that should have finished in front of him. And so let's take a gander at who those cars were. Let's just look at the bottom. Was this a wreckfest? Did this take out a lot of the big three? So let's see. Christopher Bell taken out in a wreck. We had Austin Dillon, a car that most likely would have finished in front of Jeffrey Earnhardt in this race, being taken out. We have Cole Custer getting damaged, finishing laps down. We also have Chase Briscoe, a lap down, most likely had damage in this race. And so that's 4 drivers that should have finished in front of Jeffrey Earnhardt. And where was he able to finish? I'm assuming Cindric had a bad run, even though it was Cindric still in 2019, didn't hit that pinnacle that he was at, or that he's been at last year. But that's 4 cars that should have finished in front of Earnhardt. Where does that put Jeffrey Earnhardt back? Around 7th, around 8th, around 9th, around 6th, around 10. And so when we look at how he ran last time he was in a competitive car in a weak field, might I remind you that this Xfinity Series field this season should be much, much stronger than any field that we've seen in the past couple of years. I don't see Jeffrey Earnhardt elevating this car up to what even John Nemechek did. Like, by default, Earnhardt and even Truex have a 15th, 14th place car with any Joe Schmo driver. Do they have that talent to carry that car from 14th to running inside the top 4? I don't see that. I don't see them pushing it inside the top 5 a ton. And you got to remember that Earnhardt's only going to be in this car a short amount of time. Same thing with Ryan Truex. So not only are they not going to be not comfortable, but they're not in it every single week. They're only doing mainly like one-off races. And so even outside of that, they haven't said what races they're running in specifically yet. I'm pretty sure it's one of them's running Daytona, but when we get to tracks that actually matter, are they running intermediate tracks? Are they running short tracks? Are they running Michigan? Are they running Auto Club? What cars they're in or what tracks they're in, that greatly determines how well these guys are going to do if they're at a track that they don't have a lot of experience at that year. Just tons of things behind that. And so basically finishing in what I've said, like I feel like Earnhardt is very similar to Jeb Bush in the 2016 presidential election, to where he more or less ran off of, well, it's my turn to be president, or it's my turn to run. Same thing with Jeffrey here. I'm an Earnhardt. Now it's my turn. I finally got rid of that, that decrepit old has-been junior. Now it's my turn to carry the Earnhardt flame and the banner and everything, and I just don't see that from Jeffrey Earnhardt. And so if I'm kind of crucifying Earnhardt here, saying that, or at least making arguments that we're going to see him run anywhere from 15th to 8th, which is good for Earnhardt, but in terms of what this car could do, that's mainly expected. If he's performing any less than that, then signs are showing that, Jeffrey doesn't have it. Same thing with Ryan Truex. Personally, I don't believe Ryan Truex is that good of a driver. I would actually put Jeffrey Earnhardt above Ryan Truex in this. And so when we look at how these guys are finishing, and you kind of, at least in my opinion, want an idea of where Jeffrey and Ryan Truex should be running by default, is going to be that 17th to 13th place area. I'm not going to be shocked if we see Ryan Truex finish 14th in this car at some points. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Jeffrey Earnhardt finish 9th in this car. But really, outside of that stuff, like it's not blowing your socks off. It's still the same car. I still want to focus on this when a real driver is in this car. And so, more or less, that's more my argument for the whole Jeffrey Earnhardt and the Ryan Truex questions that I've been asked by about 2 or 3 people on Twitter the past week whenever the deal was announced, and I figured I'd just answer it through here and kind of show you the lap-by-lap data that you get for this year, and by supporting us, supporting the channel. So anyway, thank you for watching. If you want to support me, support Pierce, all the links are in the description below, and we look forward to this year. Yeah, I just look forward to being back. So yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.